You want to think about, did I contribute my abilities and strength that I think are worthy of attentiveness because they can move the needle a little bit in the small sector of society I'm a part of? Your unique DNA of your one chance on this earth is going to be profound meaning and purpose that you make on something.
Hello and welcome to The Examined Life. My name is Kenny Primrose. For any of you new listeners, let me begin by explaining the concept to you. This is a podcast about finding wise guides for life who are exploring questions that really matter. Each episode takes a deep dive into a question that an influential thinker believes we should be asking ourselves. So far this season, we've heard Dacher Keltner explore what awe tells us about living a meaningful life. Elizabeth Oldfield has discussed formation of our characters and indeed our souls. Dougal Hine explored with me what it means to live at a time of endings. I also spoke to Eve Poole about human distinctiveness in a world of AI, and last week's episode was with Ian McGilchrist, where we discussed what it was that our culture might be preventing us from seeing. These podcasts are edited to fit within an hour or so, though I'll put the longer versions as videos on YouTube in due course. I've also been trying to process and apply what I learn in these interviews on my Substack channel, Positively Maladjusted. The link is in the show notes. If you sign up for those, I promise you I'll try really hard to make it worth your while reading whatever I write. Hopefully that will be enough of a payoff, but if it's not, then you can enjoy the comfort of knowing that you have at least given me some minor encouragement by signing up. Today, I am delighted to be in conversation with Todd Kashdan. Todd is a professor of psychology at George Mason University, where he also directs the Wellbeing Laboratory. His work has focused on curiosity, meaning and purpose in life, and psychological flexibility. Today's conversation is rooted in his book, The Art of Insubordination, where we explore his question: what are the best ways to be influential when in the minority, lacking power or status, and the numbers behind you? It's a great question, a really important one, and I love discussing it with him. I hope you will enjoy listening. Todd, hello and welcome to The Examined Life. I'm delighted you are joining me in conversation today. When we corresponded over email, you sent me a question that we could discuss, something that had been on your mind, you'd been preoccupied by. I'm going to read it to you now and you can tell me whether this still works, whether this is still what has been on your mind. So you asked, what are the best ways to be influential when you're in the minority, lacking power or status, and the numbers behind you? Is that still the question that you think we should be asking ourselves?
Perfect. That's great.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to hear more, to dive into the question.
Oh, no, this is something, I mean, you're talking about from Copernicus and Galileo onward. I mean, there's never a time where there's someone lacking power and status who has great ideas, who is completely being ignored and has no idea, how do I get a platform and a channel?
As you intimate, this is how history moves forward. You get these voices, dissident voices, sometimes from the margins, questioning received wisdom or orthodox ways of doing things. You've written a book on this, The Art of Insubordination. Is this a kind of subject of academic inquiry for you, or is there also, something personal at stake here? What is it that drives your inquiry for this, the art of insubordination, how people without influence can have a voice?
Both. I mean, for me, this book started, I don't know, let's say like 7 or 8 years ago, where I was realizing that in academia and the organizations that I work with, you typically have a proxy for intelligence and creativity, which is, are you assertive? Do you speak loudly? Do you speak clearly? And then do you take over the room? And we know from people like Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet, where your ability to be loud and dominant in a room has a correlation of no more than 0.10 with how effective you actually are. But yet, here we are in 2024, where I've been sending these emails for 20 years at the same university of saying, we have the same 2 or 3 super loud, men who are of my age who are dominating these meetings, and it hasn't changed at all. And the reason is because people have so much inertia to figure out how could we design a way where we don't dissuade them from talking, but we bring more voices in. And what we keep doing is we keep adding and adding things that could make it potentially easier. The meetings become longer, people disengage, so the new strategies don't work. And so for me, I've always offered, and this fits in with one of the answers to the question, which is always try to offer an idea, not just a provocation. Even if your idea makes no sense whatsoever, because someone else might pick up on the breadcrumbs and developing something from it. So before we went on air, we were talking about Lord of the Flies, and the idea of like how do you survive this like chaotic and social environment where you don't want to be piggy and be torched and thrown off a cliff and stabbed with wooden knives. Is you can think about a conch where you only get 3 opportunities to speak per meeting, but you can have a caveat where someone can offer you their conch, and now you are making a social norm of reciprocity, which is I'll give you my conch now. There might be a meeting in the future where I might want your conch that happens there. And it's just a very simple behavioral strategy to experiment with to make sure that the loudest people do not determine the decisions that are made and what we think are the good ideas that are worth contemplating.
It reminds me of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The more you think you have to offer, the less is this what it is? The Dunning-Kruger, like the more confident you feel at something, the less competent you actually are, something like that. But they say the life and business and all kinds of institutions, they're like a swimming pool. All the noise is at the shallow end. And I guess Susan Cain would have said something similar, right, in her book Quiet, that it's those who have the most to offer that often don't know how to get any purchase in a meeting or with people or whatever. So why does the status quo make it so difficult for for one to have influence? What are the characteristics of our culture that you would seek to change to create more space for the trailblazers?
Yeah, well, one of the things is that we walk through the world, and I think I want people to think about this more consciously because we do this on the fringes of conscious awareness. We're always thinking about what do I have in the tank in terms of bioenergetic resources that are available to me? And one thing that we know from the work of Jim Cohn at University of Virginia and elsewhere is that your bioenergetic resource is not just about whether you had coffee in the morning. It's not just about whether you did a functional mobility workout in the morning. But if you have trusted allies that are proximal to you, near to you, you view them as an extension of yourself. It's almost like you have a backpack that's not heavy, that's near you, where you can open it up and their strengths, capacities, skills, and abilities, philosophies of life, and their social network is accessible to you just as they have a backpack with everything about you, which they have access to as well. Like you can go into my house, grab whatever you need. I want you to prosper in life, and you have the keys to mine as well. That is the quintessential reciprocal, gradual self-disclosure of a true confidant or close relationship. We often forget that that's what other people do in our lives. And because of that, we don't leverage them when we're in meetings, when we think that we're under threat, or like where this conversation is going, we think we have a really good idea and we want to wonder, how do I get some traction? It's going to be through those other people.
This reminds me of, I wonder what truth there is in psychology, that you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. Does that resonate from your experience?
I don't love it, but I like the general gist of where it's going. To me, it's if you thought about who would you tell secrets to that you believe they would take it to the grave? What we know from science is that the ideal number of close friends is 3. So we have a loneliness epidemic that's happening here. Most people have a massive decline in the number of close friends they have. You only need 3. You actually don't have the mental bandwidth to attend to too many close friends, even if you say that you're close friends to happen there. And so for me, it's that to what degree are you allowing them to be proximal to you? So they don't have to be physically next to you. It could just be like, I have a friend of mine from grad school. I haven't seen them for, I don't know, 18 years. David Dierenfeld. He was just so calm, cool, and collected when he spoke. I mean, I just picture him having one of those 1930s long golden cigarette holders and just holding this, not even smoking the cigarette, just having it between his two fingers, very chill, relaxed under the most stressful situations, and always knew what to say. And so I think about him on my shoulder. So he's proximal to me, even though he's not physically near me, for decades. Because I'm like, what would David Dierenfeld do? How would he behave in this social situation? And when you imagine and integrate other people into your lives, especially the best parts of them, you become stronger, wiser, and smarter.
Thank you. So I think that's helpful. I can think of a number of friends who I would try and channel in certain circumstances. Channeling might be the word here.
That's a good word.
So you're talking about principled insubordination. I think it's probably worth parsing out what you mean by that. So what is the difference between a principled insubordinate and someone just being rebellious and pushing against authority?
Yeah, so if you think about insubordination, it comes from military organizations, from the Israeli Defense Forces in Israel to whatever behemoth we have in the United States. And it's the idea of you are challenging authorities in a social hierarchy that are above you. And in most organizations, including the military, it is considered an offense. It is considered something that is worthy of severe punishment. And what I would argue is that if the ideas that they are offering, or the ideas that they are criticizing, deserve criticism, this is not an offense. This is actually someone that shows great care and concern for the group, such that I am willing to risk my hide. I'm willing to be rejected. I'm willing for you to actually throw me under the bus because I want this group to be healthy and I want it to last for a longer period of time. And I think we have to flip this a little bit on its head and realize that most dissenters that disagree with the group, that are coming on a regular basis, they're coming to meetings, they're responding to emails, they are there, they're on the front lines if you're talking about a military example or as a metaphor. And the reason they speak up is not because they think that they're amazing. It's because they care so much about the group. And we think that dissenters or insubordinates, they don't care about the group and they want to basically burn it to the ground. And so what I want to do is say, we need a cultural shift in thinking about this. Is if someone critiques something in the organization or in what our group is doing, to ask yourself, is there any merit to it? Now, if there's even a 15% merit, that is worthy of a conversation and a reflection.
Who are some of the people that you think, and you mentioned a few in the book, who comes to mind when you think of people who have been really powerful, principled insubordinates? Like, who are your heroes in the Hall of Fame there?
Well, I mean, my hero is Richard Feynman, who was the Nobel Prize winning physicist who, if you watch Oppenheimer, I found the movie to be extremely boring and almost fell asleep. But there is actually a scene where you only see the back of Richard Feynman, who is part of the Manhattan Project, to basically develop, an atomic bomb to actually end World War II. And he gets no lines in this movie. But here was a guy who was trying to figure out quantum physics on his own in his laboratory. He was also was invited for the Manhattan Project to stop World War II. NASA, 1984, when they had the explosion and they lost the first teacher who was an astronaut in space, he was invited onto a panel to figure out what the hell did we do wrong. And so his whole life was about, how do I educate the world about science so that we can have better aircrafts, better space technology, have more peace, less war. And this was a guy who was controversial, not because of the quality of his ideas, because he spoke out of turn. Here you are, this professor of physics at an Ivy League school, and we see the same thing today. As soon as you hear Ivy League school, you get the word elitist thrown at you. And I would say, I don't care where you go to school. What I care about is quality of ideas. I don't care what you look like. What I care is quality of ideas. And Richard Feynman is my hero because he was extremely good at describing why this criticism has merit. So I'm not going to go through all the details about when he was on the commission to figure out why did the space shuttle explode in space and actually lose several astronauts. But one of the things that he did was there was back in the day when you had the major media networks were there and they all had their cameras and they were videotaping him. He didn't go through a spiel about the physics. He actually took a little O-ring, put it into water, and actually showed you why it would distend and potentially be weaker over the elements, water and oxygen hitting up with this O-ring. And so you watch this as he was talking, and you could see this little tiny $3.50 experiment that's happening there, and say, oh, if that's what was anything that was on the space shuttle, then it would make sense why it would explode to happen there. And that's the beauty of being lacking power, lacking status, and making impact, is that can you get people to see what you're seeing, not because of your perspective, because you're taking their perspective, which is unlike your own.
And it's one of your points which adds to this is like produce messages that are more likely to change people's minds. Like how are you gonna communicate to good effect here? Do you think people like Feynman and other kind of heroes you can think of, are they more likely to emerge from individualistic rather than collectivist societies? Is there a relationship between how much we let principled insubordination like flourish, and clearly it's not enough in an individualistic society rather than a collective one?
That's a really good question. I think it's more tuned with, to what degree are you mirroring the values of the society that you're a part of when you're trying to persuade other people? So I was just trying to think, for Nelson Mandela, after 18 years in prison, was he in a collectivist versus an individualistic society? And I'm not actually, I think it's more collectivist than individualistic.
It's like Ubuntu is a Zulu word, right? They have this I am because we are. So I think you're probably right. It's more collectivist.
So another one, I think most people's hero, Nelson Mandela, makes the top 20 list, is one of the most amazing things he did is, and you really have to break this down. You are in prison for 18 years and you're in the right. That's a hard thing to get your hands around. And what does he do when he walks out? One of the guards, who was, for lack of a better word, a white nationalist who was identified by his racism against Black Africans. This is how he identified. Nelson Mandela, when he came out, did not decide that I'm going to reject you, ostracize you, and go back to, quote unquote, my in-group. What he did was say, you've spent all these years with me. I've listened to you. I think there's a better version. This is not his words exactly. There's a better version of you that's out there. I want to invite you into my group to improve Africa in this reconciliation moment. And he became one of the most loyal people in the cabinet of Nelson Mandela. And this was, a white supremacist, truly a white nationalist supremacist that happened there. And that is to me emblematic of Nelson Mandela's approach, which is, I realize you have 25 to 40% of people that live in Africa who hate people that look like me. I'm not going to just persuade you. I'm going to bring some of the people on your group and bring that into the group, and we'll integrate together to figure out how do we create a better society so that basically our kids are less likely to experience suffering over flourishing that happens there. And it's hard to imagine, even to this day, watching someone who was a Democrat that would make it into office and say, you know what, 50% of the country is probably going to vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to bring some of the MAGAs into my cabinet. Or do the same thing, do the same thing in Poland, do the same thing in Hungary. Is that you can't even imagine decades later anyone doing what Mandela did. And what I think that we need to do is have a better understanding of history, deconstruct what worked, what didn't, and break down those strategies. And scientists have been studying. And we know that if you bring out group members into the in-group and you explain the rationale for it, that group becomes stronger by having those dissenting multiple perspectives.
Right. And some of this power in the Mandela effect is also, it seems, connecting with people across divides who previously were able to reduce you to a caricature. But when you connect with them and you're humanized, that's no longer the case. I'd like to ask about age and stage and principled insubordination. What I mean by that is it's the case that, young people, the younger you are, the more idealistic you are, and also the less you've got to lose. So people tend to be kind of left wing when they're young and right wing when they're old. And part of the reason for that is perhaps that there is more to lose. We earn more money as we get older. We have more influence. We have more skin in the game. I've heard it said that ideals are like farts. You hold on to them tightly, then you let go of them quietly. And, I think there's some truth in that. I can see it in my own life. And so my question, I suppose, is about whether you have any words of wisdom to those of us who would be principled insubordinates, but feel like we've got a lot to lose. And being a principled insubordinate when you have a mortgage to pay and kids and so on is more challenging. What do you say to such people?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up because I think of the whole world as trade-offs. So when I think about therapy, when I think about psychotropic medication that you're taking, whether it's right now we're talking about psychedelic-induced positive psychotherapy with ketamine and MDMA that's showing some efficacy with veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. Here's what's not in the conversation. You take a medication that's going to alter the reuptake of dopamine or serotonin. There's going to be a trade-off. So the question is, what are you willing to absorb? And that's the big question that I want people to think about. So when I think about in my own life in terms of sacrifices that I've made to speak out against issues that I think are problematic, I've almost always taken a hit financially, socially, reputation-wise. And the thing is, how much do you actually need? And I get the idea, stockpiling. If you have kids, thinking about the grandkids, you want to pass down intergenerational wealth, your home. But in reality, when you think about like what you want to do in a given month, there are many times you feel like you need to go to Malaysia, to one of those amazing resorts, or like you need a 4-star hotel. Of course, everyone likes like a nice bed, like a nice shower, and everyone wants to go dining every once in a while or order good food. But in reality, we don't need that much for our well-being. We need it for a sense of status. We need it because we compare ourselves to other people who have great things. And I think that when you think about legacy, you want to think about, did I contribute my abilities and strength that I think are worthy of attentiveness because they can move the needle a little bit in the small sector of society I'm a part of? How am I going to feel about that versus the extra $100,000 a year that I'm compounding over the course of time, which is like everybody else? Your unique DNA of your one chance on this earth is going to be profound meaning and purpose that you make on something. Now, I know I study this, so I think about this all the time. I'm willing to take hits all the time. But I do realize that not everyone is good at responding to negative feedback, criticism, people trolling you. And not everyone is willing to have an entire room of people go quiet when you raise your hand and you say something. And I would say is that these moments, these crucibles, are what make you offer the unique contribution to the world.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, like it takes balls, and some of those come with like taking the long view. Like you say, if you want to be a contributor, if you want to move the needle and have a meaningful life, you make me think a little bit of David Brooks's book The Second Mountain, where he talks about the first mountain is you're building an ego, basically status and that kind of thing. But ultimately, well, at least this is what I took from the book. Either you get to the top and it's pretty disappointing, the view is not that satisfying, or more likely you get knocked off. But what really is rewarding is committing to something that's bigger than yourself. Some kind of, I think that probably involves a moral or spiritual direction for which you're willing to make sacrifices. And therein lies the, like, at least no small part of the key to feeling like your days are meaningfully spent.
Yeah, so this is a great spin-off into a related topic. So I've talked about these archetypes of principled rebels or principled insubordinates. Treat them like synonyms. And one of them that gets very little attention is a niche carver. And that's that you were just constructing your own life in a fulfilling way that doesn't match the zeitgeist or the social norms of the day. So I think about during COVID, a lot of people had their van life where they decided, I don't want to stay in one place. I want to like basically travel constantly and meet new people, eat new foods, and I'm just going to live in a van and do it this way. And there's a lot of pushback from a lot of people of like, this is not a healthy way to raise children. There's no evidence, by the way, to support for or against that kind of lifestyle. Or you have a new movement that's really taken like roots in America, which is polyamory. Not my thing, but for a lot of people, the idea of, maybe monogamy, like it was never the proper way for humans to behave. Or to be more pragmatic, there's a subset of people that cannot imagine living their lives with just one person having this romantic life. No judgment. My only concern is, are you doing this intrinsically motivated, or were you coerced by a partner to enter into this kind of lifestyle that happens there? But if you do it and you approach life in your own unique way, like this is fantastic. And I think many of us, no matter what we say about, success is overrated in terms of focusing on money and status and power, we are consciously and unconsciously influenced by whatever society says is the cool way for living your life. And what I'm arguing for is that relatively independent of this is that, are you saying and doing the things which is that you've always wanted to do, and you now finally are in a situation where you have enough people that can listen to you? If not, how big does your bank account have to be? How big does your badge have to be for your company? And if the answer is never, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I would say that you're not living the right life. Like you're waiting for something, you're waiting for someone to anoint you. And I would say is stop waiting for permission, because you're never going to get it, because people like the structure if it works for them.
It has like overtones of kind of therapeutic language, permission, and maybe authenticity. Is that one of the words that you connect with being a principled rebel? Having a connection with what you intrinsically care about.
Yeah, you described it very nicely. I want people to rebel against things because if no one else heard about this, except for the people they're talking to, doesn't get any publicity whatsoever, is this the thing that you want to be known for? That's a nice, simple indicator of, is this message authentic? Is it tied to your core values and interests? For a lot of people, it's to show that I'm a good group member. I'm a good liberal. I'm a good conservative. I'm a good representative of blue collar workers. I'm a good representative of universities, or whatever the thing is. And I watch as activists, social activists, really do a piss poor job of making impact, because you could read it from the outside that you don't really care about this. You're doing this to get attention. And so I don't know if you saw where, I forgot what country it was in, but it was pro-Palestinian protesters that were taking knives and were cutting up artwork from the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s. And it was almost universally despised because the two didn't connect to each other. And it's saying is that you don't care about culture because you're destroying artwork from beyond our time period. And you're losing fans and advocates and potential allies very quickly because there's no connection between you shredding up old artwork in museums and then Palestine, other than you're getting attention. And this is I wish I could meet regularly with activists, and I don't even care if I agree with the issue. Climate change, racial dynamics, gender issues, trans issues. A lot of these social activists that are out there, they're not using science-based principles to bring people in other than people that are already advocates.
And that's kind of exactly where your book comes in. This raft of scientific data on how to give oxygen to principled insubordinates who might have something really helpful to say. You say in your book that this is for anyone who yearns to see more justice, more freedom, more financial stability, more purpose, more humanity. And it's like, who doesn't want that? But for that to emerge, the freedom, the purpose, the humanity, etc., we need to create spaces where we can listen to each other. And I feel like one of the problems is that we don't create those spaces for listening to one another. And we're kind of chronically bad at listening to people who think differently from us, who will trouble and disrupt whatever, structure and status quo we have. So I guess, how do we create those spaces to allow conversations on justice and flourishing to emerge?
Yeah. I mean, think about my colleague John Haidt and Jean Twenge, who right now are on the fight to have phone-free schools from elementary school to high school, and it's hard to argue against it. And yet, you have people that do because of inertia, in terms of like, well, how are we going to do that? And then, what if they need to call their parents? So, and in there becomes lots of interesting questions, like you're saying, to listen to, which is, to what degree do you trust the people that are working in the school? Because now it's actually being put to the test. If you're saying that a 7th grade child, a 13-year-old child, needs to have the phone on them where they can go on social media throughout the day and be distracted from all the lessons about history and math and and English, because they can call their parents, you are implicitly saying or explicitly saying, I don't trust the nurse. I don't trust the teachers. I don't trust that they will take care of the welfare of my child. And then you have another question, which is, why do you think that people take a pay cut to become teachers? These are not wealthy people who are 7th grade teachers of 13-year-olds. They're doing it because they care about children in general that are going there. And so you can start with the conflict. Should we have phone-free zones in schools? And then go down all these questions. And I want people to actually have to stand up and say, I don't trust any of the teachers. And then I want the vice principal to say, why? And put the onus back on them. Because just like you're saying, on social media, this isn't happening. We're not having pauses where you're given an open-ended question where now you have to say, why would you say you don't trust any of the teachers here? Then why are you living in this area? Like, your kids are young. You can go to like the school over. What's missing in other schools that you think's not here in terms of the staff that's caring for your kid? And my guess is, once you start having this very interested, curious conversation about this topic, most people will eventually say, I don't know, and they can't defend it. And now you actually can have some persuasive power in this conversation. But it does really require an inefficiency, very slow time.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've nailed it there, Todd. The inefficiency, building efficiency and utilitarianism into everything we do has been a massive curse, it feels. Like, that human element, and curiosity needs oxygen, right? It needs space, and it needs to hit dead ends and cul-de-sacs in order to kind of to allow it to thrive and take you where it needs to take you. I mean, I think the Jonathan Haidt and Jean, I always pronounce your name wrong. It's Twenge, not Twenge, or like Twenge.
I say Twinge. I'm gonna see if she gets mad if we say Twenge.
Right. Yeah. I'll wait and find out. Yeah, their research is so important. I'm a huge advocate of minimizing technology and not at all for kids. But what comes to mind? Krishnamurti, the philosopher, has a nice quote. He said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society." And I think, the way that you're well adjusted now if you have a smartphone when you are less than 10, you're on social media when you're 12, you're kind of constantly anxious, depressed, fear of missing out, looking at, porn way before that's ever like, those things take time to pay attention to, rather than being swept up with the kind of the drift of culture. So I wonder, when you wrote this book, or when you think of principled insubordinates, are there areas that you hope that principled rebels might appear? Like, where do you see that we are particularly sick right now? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, and I love your phrase of curiosity needing like the dead ends, the cul-de-sacs, like the air to breathe. I mean, you're talking poetry to me. I love this. I mean, for me, I end the book talking about how can we train young children to be bullshit detectors, critical thinkers. It's really kind of after one of my other heroes, Carl Sagan, kind of like extending his line of thinking on this. And I mean, to me, it's you got to think about. I mean, I'm going to turn 50 in 2 months with this conversation right now, and so I'm 5 years. I've been into generativity of like how do we prepare the next generations and I mean, it has to be the young people. Like it has to be the young people. And just because this is the inertia, is that all these tools exist. Obviously, tools can be for good or for evil, and everything in between that happens there. But we can't assume that we can just hand them things and they'll automatically know what to do with them. And so, what really bothers me is a number of societal trends. So, yeah, plenty of people talking about the phones. But one of the things that's disturbing, listening to my high school twins, is when they say that teachers don't talk about any current events because they don't want to elicit any controversy where parents will call in and complain. Just think about this. You have kids that are going to go to college next year and become the leaders of the world. Not everybody, but like some of them. Or they're small fiefdoms, like in the organizations that they're part of. And you can't mention Ukraine, and you can't mention Russia, and you can't mention Israel, and you can't mention Palestine because you're afraid it's going to go off the rails that happens there, and a parent is going to complain. To me, that speaks of how are you planning to have this conversation? Have you been trained in productive conflict? Like, have you made rules of engagement that happen there? And then for the parents that complain, the first one that complains, have a meeting. The whole school, not just that parent, all of the parents, and say, bring out all of your tension, all of your concerns and worries. And then again, you have this very inefficient, curious conversation. What do you want to do with a bunch of 16 to 18-year-olds that we're trying to train to become the next leaders of the free world? And you don't want to discuss anything that's happened in the past 5 years. You want us to talk about, the Cold War, and you want us to talk about World War I and World War II and the American Revolutionary War, but you don't want to talk about now? Like, why? And I want to hear the answers because, like, I want to hear what those parents have to say in terms of what they're going to do it. Like, what's their training in history and knowledge and geopolitical conflict that happens there? And we need to have those conversations. So I really believe strongly of disrupting the school system.
I couldn't agree more. I think that fear of conflict and disagreement and causing offense has been like tremendously destructive to our ability to think clearly and to coexist with difference and with controversy. So one of the things that as an educator I'm really interested in is character formation. Dealing with conflict and contemporary issues and controversy, etc., is as much about disposition as it is about knowledge, perhaps more about disposition. And so I wonder whether you might be able to pin down a few of the virtues that you think are helpful in rearing people who will either perhaps become principled insubordinates themselves, or at least make space for those, principled insubordinates to raise their voice, to make their points, and to be listened to.
Yeah, so for me, it's the triangle of curiosity, perspective getting, and intellectual humility. So since we haven't talked about intellectual humility directly, one of the strategies that I think is very important is try to figure out who's going to be your greatest adversary in whatever it is that you're interested in. So if you're going to go into a meeting and say that we need to invest more in technology because I want to make sure that I can show all the kids in my classroom the things that they're interested in. So I need access to technology quickly, fast, really good bandwidth, so we can talk about the videos of why this is pseudoscience and garbage and why this is empirically based, and have them tell me like what do you see, what are the markers, what are the signals that go in there. You're going to need good technology. So when you go in that room, before you go into that room and have that conversation, think to yourself, who's going to be against you? And what you want to do is take social group dynamics out of the equation by meeting them privately, one-on-one, no audience. So now we're not shooting for how many thumbs up do you get, how many down thumbs do you get. And you're telling them, I'm coming to see you because I'm going to bring up this topic. And I have a feeling that your stance is going to be the opposite of mine. So can you point holes in my argument? And can you help me so I can actually talk about this in a more effective way? I promise I'll give you credit. You're meeting a one-on-one. Everyone's nicer one-on-one when no one else is there. This is why everyone's meeting on social media, because you think millions of people are listening when really it's like 30. But it feels like millions. When you get into that meeting and you introduce, we need to have more technology because it's going to help us connect with young folk in the classroom that happens here. Now, I met with Stacy before this because I thought to myself, you know what? She's probably not going to be thinking the same way as me. Well, she brought up some really great ideas that made me tweak what I was going to say and what I actually want to say now. That statement is going to trigger curiosity. Like, wait, Todd met with Stacy? They met one-on-one? They spent time with the other? Those two, that happens there? So now everyone's defenses come down a little bit. Everyone's a little bit more intrigued. What the hell is Todd going to say? What was he originally going to say? And what's this new version with Stacy's tweaks that are in there? So I have now introduced a platform where I have people engaged. I have people attentive. When you're attentive, you absorb more information. When you absorb more information, you can elaborate more on what I'm saying and improve or criticize effectively my ideas. And Stacy, who's in that room, her ego is flying because I'm saying she's a co-creator here. She's a collaborator. I have basically disarmed all of her opportunities to rip me apart because I said she ought to rip me apart to happen there. And so all of this is a really effective social persuasion strategy in groups that can, and what we normally do is we go into that meeting and say to ourselves, what do I think Stacey's going to say? And steel yourself with white knuckles, anxious, ready for Stacey to pound on you. Why would you do that? So here is a preemptive strategy, psychological jujitsu, where you're going to bring Stacey as a collaborator on the team before you meet the larger group.
That's helpful. That's super helpful. Maybe it kind of answers my question already. I was going to say you're a scientist, right? That's the work that you do, and you've studied principled insubordination. But you call it an art, the art of insubordination, rather than a science. Is there anything to the distinction between those words, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Einstein, I don't remember the quote exactly, but talks about art and science are similar because both are transcending reality. And I think about this all the time, is that, really good art. You're talking about Dostoevsky. You're talking about that new movie on Netflix, May December, which is about that, a 36-year-old teacher who had an affair with a 7th grader. And they open it up as really like a conversation in terms of they're married for 20 years now. How do you respond to this relationship 20 years later, retrospectively, when it was like kind of wrong in the starting point? It's a lot of very complicated questions. You're transcending reality. What you want to be doing constantly is the art is you're looking for tests. You're looking for experiments. You're looking to play with these ideas. And when you're in a mode of play, you're open to like, oh yeah, what a great new rule to add to make tag even more fun. Is the idea of, it's like, if you are physically in the air, then you have these new rules that are in there. Like it's harder when you're not, your feet aren't on the ground, and you get to design anything the way that you want to in this room of people. You're supposed to have 3, 4, 5, 6 different iterations of ideas possible before the room ends. What do we typically do in the workplace is one person has an idea and then we vote, are we for it or against it? It goes completely counterintuitive to everything that we know about the art. The art of actually creating something is that we should have competing ideas, diverging opinions, viewpoint diversity, challenging, but we're not argumentative. We are having this productive argument because there is room for more than one idea, because the goal is not to be right. The goal is to produce the best possible outcome.
That's such a good answer. I love it. The art and science both transcend reality. It makes me think of the writer Frederick Buechner said, all good art should sharpen your hearing. And there's a sense in which I think like good insubordination has to sharpen your hearing, like make you pay closer attention. Uh,
I love
yeah,
that.
I love it too. I love the art, that twinning of art and science as transcending our current constructs of reality.
Have you ever been a juror before in a court
No,
case?
it's one of the things I'd actually quite like to be, but every time I've been asked, it just couldn't happen. So no, how come?
Yeah, no, because so I've done it a few times. I grew up in New York City, so I've been on a couple of court cases. I was on a kidnapping case. Yeah, some pretty nasty a mafia case. And so one of the things that when you're in there is there's a lot of great research on courtroom activity, but there's also the art in terms of when you're with 11 jurors that you've never met before. When do you speak? How do you speak? Like, how do you direct the room? How do you make sure that you're not an overly dominant force? Because we know from reality TV shows, from Survivor onward, is the way to get kicked off the island is be the loudest, most powerful, attempting person in the room. You don't want to be the loudest person. You don't want to be the quietest person. You want to be in the middle. And in the juror, when you're in a jury deciding on the fate of a kidnapping case, is you want to be like fifth. And you just bring up an idea in terms of like, but I mean, why would they? They must have a motivation, an internal motivation that we don't have access to in terms of why they did this. So the question is it first degree or is it third degree? Because like we don't know if there's intentionality here. Does anyone really feel like they have an understanding of like what this person's mindset was? And again, no answers. Go back to the strengths you mentioned before. What are the strengths? Intellectual humility. I have an inkling, but I might not reveal my hypothesis yet because I don't want to be the first person to speak. And so I'm inviting other people to share their opinions. And once the conversation gets going, now we're going to have a bunch of different ideas. We might actually realize, like, you know what? Like, now that I'm starting to, the other strength, try to get the perspective of this alleged kidnapper. You might realize, like, we don't really know anything about this person. To be first degree, there has to be clear intentionality. And from this conversation, it seems like we don't know anything about them. It is the greatest place to understand the value of dissent. If everyone agrees up front, this is a terrible crime, nobody should kidnap anybody, let's throw everything at them. That's not how the legal system should work. The legal system shouldn't work with how upset you are. The legal system should work in terms of, to what degree does this match the exact criteria for the exact crime that exists? And so it requires dissenting voices. And just as it is in the courtroom, or when you're having like a preceding meeting where there's a convening of the jurors, it should be no different than a parent teacher association meeting. It should be no different if a bunch of coaches meeting with their kids before an athletic event, and there should be no different when you're with your family deciding what should be the family vacation.
Yeah, I love it. Brings to mind Columbo, my favorite cult detective. I reckon he had that great way of persuading people, but also not until he'd shown quite a lot of humility and deep listening. I wonder if, Todd, I could bring this to land with one like last question. That when we talk about the cultivation of certain virtues, curiosity, critical thinking, humility, and so on, they're democratic, like they're open to all of us. But when we think about principled rebels, we think that's for them, that's not for me. That's like somebody else is doing that. To what I guess maybe it's two questions if I kind of fudge it. How do I know if I'm a principled insubordinate just waiting to hatch? Or is it something you'd be happy to say, you know, too many cooks, it's not for everyone. Let some people do it and they'll know who they are.
Great questions. I really feel strongly about we're not trying to increase the number of principled rebels in the world. We're trying to permit and embrace their presence. And if you're the type of person that has opinions about the people that are above you in the pecking order, that means your institutions, government, education, international relations, whoever is deciding the fate for your livelihood, if you have opinions about them that are divergent from what people are actually doing, you're basically a principled insubordinate in the making who just kept your ideas privately. And so what I'm actually saying is that we need to have social groups where we permit people to disagree from the majority. So one thing, for example, that I do when I'm in workshops or I'm in my classes and teaching is that I tell them, I'm looking for the minorities of one, the one person who disagrees with everyone. I will like you the most in the room because I know that it's risky. I know it's crazy. I will find the nugget in whatever idea that's not described perfectly. I'm going to look for it. And I'm going to respect you, even if everyone disagrees with you. That happens there. We need to be doing this more often. We need to be saying is that I want to hear the one lone voice that disagrees with everyone. And you don't just let them speak. You make sure that you basically give them praise of, I want to see more people that are like Jackie. So there are more Jackies in these conversations who are minorities of one that are saying nothing because they know, I don't want to be negatively evaluated. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be ostracized and rejected. I want to hear the singular voices that disagree with everybody. Even if they're wrong, you want to praise them. And that's permitting and embracing principled insubordination. And then for us, if we actually haven't given ourselves like a voice for these thoughts that we have, is consider caveats. Starting your conversation with a caveat, which is, this is not what I study. This is not my area of expertise. I know there are tons of smart people in this room, but I had a thought that hasn't been raised yet. ... So I call this the discomfort caveat. Is with that, again, you are trying to intentionally bring down people's defenses, increases people's curiosity by having this movie trailer. I'm about to say something that's kind of weird that no one's going to agree with right here. And so but the way you're saying this is that I'm not the smartest person in this room, but I have a thought that hasn't been raised so far. Everyone's like, ooh, like I wonder what you're going to say. And that's going to be a very effective strategy for when you do the reveal.
Man, thank you. Thank you for that answer. I love the things that we've covered on authenticity, on humility, on listening well, and permission, like permission for others and permission for ourselves to be those outliers. So thank you so much, Todd. You've got me very stimulated, especially thinking about how we can cultivate the next generation of kind of trailblazers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you have clearly reading more books than me because I didn't know any of the quotes that you mentioned. So I'm going to have to try to retain them.
Thank you so much, Todd. This is a subject that, for me, feels different from many of the others covered in this series, but I'm persuaded of its importance and its place within the series. How do we make room for those people who might be able to point to better ways of being and behaving and thinking, who can call us out on our blind spots? How do we give those people a platform? How do we give them oxygen? And how do we become those people ourselves if we are, principled insubordinates? When the status quo feels broken in so many ways, as I think it does, then change is often going to come from the margins. It's not always going to come from subtle shifts and cascading ideas and management, but from those people who have the ability to see what others cannot. I hope that you enjoyed listening to Todd as much as I did. Do please look up his books and subscribe to his newsletter, which I'll link in the show notes. It's called Provoked and is excellent. Personally, I'd be fascinated to hear from you on two questions. Firstly, if you have any experience of principled insubordinates that you would be happy to share, or can think of events from history that seem to tap into this, I find them inspiring. I'd love to hear from you. Secondly, whether you've been part of a culture that creates space for this and how it did that. I'd be, again, fascinated to hear your thoughts. I'm going to sign off now. As ever, my thanks to you listeners and to others who've helped make this episode, to Todd Kashdan and to Colin Primrose. If you are interested in more input like this, then subscribe to the YouTube channel and my Substack, where you'll find more content, as well as my own thoughts on processing some of these questions and applying them to my own life. My hope is that in examining life, you will learn to become positively maladjusted to a sick society. And in terms of this episode, that you might learn to listen to principled insubordinates and even become one on occasion.